So you put in the time to learn a matchup, whether it was because you had someone handy who plays the character or actively sought them out after being dealt a mythic ass whipping. You grinded the matchup, and as far as you're concerned, any person who uses that character should hate life if the bracket gods put them to you in tournament. But fate is not without a sense of irony and wants to see if you're the whatever slayer you think you've become. Then it happens all over again, just like Uncle Ron Paul said it would. You go into the match and you start getting that old business again. The room starts spinning, all those beady little eyes start staring at you, sweating bullets, palms are sweaty, feel the vision getting thinner, mom's homemade Italian dinner. And you end up getting swept. But why? After all that grinding, why did everything this new person do just seem so foreign and unlike the others? It might be because you learned a lot more about the player you were playing than you did about their character. And this is common, like painfully common. When we grind a matchup, we normally find one person to grind it out with, and some of us are even lucky enough to grind it out with top players of that character. But many of us make a critical mistake. We play the person so much that we begin to frame the matchup around that person. That is, we confuse that player's individual playstyle and choices for a complete description of the character they're playing, and learn only to work around behaviors and sequences unique to that player, like role habits, movement patterns, which gives us a linear idea of the character and fools us into thinking we've learned more about the character than we really have. So when we go to fight new reps of that character, we find ourselves needing to make pretty costly readjustments because we try to apply specialized knowledge of one player where it's no longer applicable. Now, for those of you that call For Glory home, you've likely had the pleasure of finding someone good and patient enough that you two ended up playing until you couldn't feel feelings anymore. The guy doth bequeath unto thee a whipping of thine ass. But after a while, you do start to do better. The problem is, though, that it took you way, way, way longer than you will ever have in a tournament match to figure something out against this person, because in reality, you probably weren't learning the matchup, you were learning the player. So what then separates player-specific knowledge from matchup knowledge? So I would define it as to play the player means to exercise options that take advantage of personal habits, and this requires time to figure out and sometimes conditioning. So here's an example. I've played this Zero Suit so much that I'm just able to bully my way past his Zers and Nairs, choke his ability to space, and wait for a 4-tilt or an up-tilt, and hold shield. That's player-specific knowledge that I can't necessarily count on against other Zero Suits. To effectively play a matchup means to exercise options that directly address the things the character by design must do. And to do this, you need a good idea not just of what one player did with the character, but a good idea of what can be done in general with the character. And it's worth noting that that implies that even practice with a top-level rep may not give you the complete picture of a matchup. Here's another example. One of Yoshi's main entry tools is coming in hot with an egg to cover his nair. So I preemptively jumped over the egg and naired him back. This is something Yoshi just has to do to get in, at least one of the things he has to do, and as a corollary to that, a generic player indifferent piece of knowledge that I can put to work and from which I can build my initial game plan while I'm figuring out the finer player specific details about who I'm playing. Now, this jumbled slop hemorrhage describes, at least sort of, Yoshi's neutral, and I'm not trying to affront any Yoshi's sensibilities. Forgive me if this is incorrect, it's just my own personal understanding of what Yoshi can do to get in. It's an abstract and generic set of things Yoshi can do in neutral, with particular emphasis on the generic part. These are things any Yoshi player could realistically do, irrespective of who they are as a player. You've heard of obligate carnivores. Yeah, well, Yoshi's an obligate egg tossed across a nairvore. If he wants to succeed, that's something he just might need to do, and that's something you can count on from Yoshi to Yoshi, for the most part. Though you don't get the same kind of payoff with this matchup model that I'm talking about as you would knowing exact details about the person, their wants, inhibitions, habits, patterns, preferences, needs. Applying well-developed matchup knowledge, as I've been describing here, makes you effective against entire communities of players, not just individuals. Approaching things this way, you can start out with a general idea and quickly prune their domain of preferred options down until you eventually arrive at that specialized level of player-specific knowledge. And I think this approach addresses a serious problem in a lot of playstyles, which is rigidity. And this is the source, I think, of a lot of inconsistency in Smash 4, and speaking from just experience as a Ganon main for Ganon as well. Some people will fall into certain player-specific patterns that are just good for Ganon or any other character, and others won't, and this is just accepted as a casualty of particular playstyles when it shouldn't be. And that's the playstyle rigidity is something I plan on covering in another video as well. But anyone, if given enough time, can learn a player thoroughly enough that their sets are ultimately just a game of rock, paper, scissors, basically. But the fact remains that you don't, in a competitive context, have the kind of time it takes to finally start matching strides with the guy you found on For Glory, and it's far too common to assume you've learned a matchup when you've really only learned the player. To be confident and consistent across the board, you've got to learn and exploit that which never changes, or at least has little latitude to change, like the Yoshi example I mentioned. How exactly I think is best to go about learning matchups is, yet again, a topic for another video in the coming days. And with that, that's all I have for today. And as usual, thanks very much to everyone who stuck it out with me to the end and took the time to watch. Videos and entire series about Smash theory, the improvement process, and just organizing one's thoughts about the game are on the horizon, so I would strongly encourage you to subscribe so you don't miss my next misadventure.